It would be great if we can get a brief download of how you even started your career all the way back.
I graduated in the UK from Brunel University. I got my first class, very kind of prepared for doing well. And the crunch time came to find the job. And I had done a placement, and it's quite funny actually. I'm talking about my placement year, and I'm now back in contact with someone I did my placement with, and we're potentially looking at a partnership. I'd done my placement year for like 15 months at a bank, so at Lloyd's Banking Group. And I'd also had experience in that time on a summer intern program with Morgan Stanley and then Credit Suisse. So I had like that really, very immersed into banking already, financial services. Even going through school, I was always goal orientated, like hit the goal. The goal is to get a first class, get first class. The goal is to get a job. I don't really know where. So I was still figuring it out. And I think my experience in banking and finance made it clear to me that I wanted to work in banking and finance without actually working in it. And I'd come across consultants, I'd come across Accenture, I'd come across, all the big four. It just so happened that my buddy at the time was from Accenture and, tell me about how they work. And for me, it seemed amazing because I seemed to have the best of both worlds. And I found that interesting. But actually being a consultant meant that I would not be bored. And I think at that point, at that age, at that point in my life, I was all about, having different experiences. So I made it clear that I wanted to be in consulting. And I applied to Accenture. My buddy was from Accenture. I didn't know the world of consulting at all. And I got in. And that's and I was with Accenture for 13 years. In that time, I remember learning like very quickly the game, right? The game was understanding how the firm works. Because if you understand, for example, how the firm rewards, then you know where to put your efforts. And again, at that age, right, just graduated, you have a sense of freedom, financially, personally. It's all a very exciting point in your life. And at that age, again, my focus was very much goal driven on doing well in my career. I didn't really know what that meant until a couple of years later when I was like, okay, partner. But at that point, I felt like I learned the game. And I felt like that I understood that if I build good relationships with my clients, and ultimately, if I bring in value for the company, then I'm good. So then I was like, okay, well, how do I build good relationships with my clients? By having good opinion. I have good opinion by figuring out what my opinion is. I figure out what my opinion is by doing some analysis and doing some research and yada, yada, yada. And then I'm more confident and I'm more able to sell. Opportunities don't just magically appear. The EY opportunity appeared for me because I was a competitor to EY-Parthenon on a number of deals where I was on the Accenture side. And I guess eventually they were like, hey, come and join us. And, it turned out to be a really, really cool move for me in many, many different respects. But that opportunity presented itself, I guess, because I was ultimately leading a huge portfolio of work at a particular bank where EY were present. And literally, I faced EY probably about 6 times. Every time they were in, probably the majority of the times they were in first, and then I came along. And they were like, oh, here we go again. So, if you can't beat them, join them, basically, I think
Yeah.
was their mentality. And for me, I was able to be in that position pre-partner, pre-making partner because of that earlier learning that I had. So when you say, what's the opportunity? It's important to tell you that backdrop because opportunities don't just magically appear. They're planted. And that was the planting for me back then, that if I add value to the firm, whether that's, saving costs, helping with revenue, helping with sales, And of course, being able to lead people and, and build relationships and build, relationships, not just with clients, but with my teams, my colleagues, etc., get the followership, then that was a key ingredient to success. And that's basically like literally everything I've done since, like to this very day. It's the same formula. So yeah, so I was with Accenture 13 years. I made partner with them in just over 10 years since from graduating as well.
Looking back at those progressions and promotions, right? You've gone through the ranks from starting out at the first entry level all the way climbing to partner level. What was in your mind as you were going through, like with the same firm? Because I think a lot of us have that, including myself back then, we all have that, maybe not fantasy, but like, that type of hope that, I stick around, I will go through the ladder work, I will do it step by step, I will follow the game. What was on your mind as you were climbing through the ranks and actually made it to the kind of ultimate level that a lot of people would hope for?
What was going through my mind was, get to the next step, get to the top. And the top for me really just meant getting to that next phase in my career, making partner, because at every level, at every, monumental milestone, there are more levels and more monumental milestones. So for me, that's what good looked like, because I knew that it would unlock and open even more opportunities, but I didn't really know what I was in for until I actually made it, because then even more things happen, even more opportunities come to you. So you don't really understand until you're kind of there. That is that title. That's what you're reaching for. That's what I was reaching for, the title.
As part of that title kind of climbing, was each of those progression and change of title something that comes along for you, or did you actually have to fight for it actively?
It doesn't just happen. Like people think that, sponsorship just happens. No, you've got to actually ask for it. So I'll give you
Like multiple times.
yes, like absolutely. So just to enrich both of those answers, my goal set was on the title. That was the outcome, but that's not a given, right? And it goes back to, I'm always going to refer to that early learning of knowing the game. The game is not a universal game. It is different for each company, for each location, for each geography. You've got to understand what people want, right? What does my team need? What does the region need? You've got to understand that. That's the game. The game changes depending on who you are, where you are, etc. So the number one question I normally get from people who report to me and have worked for me around progression is, oh, I want to go for promotion. What should I be doing? And actually, I love it when people say, what should I be doing? Because a lot of the time you hear, I want to go for promotion. And then you ask a question, great, so what's your story? That's my favorite question, what's your story? And I hear crickets. You can literally hear the crickets, like the silence. Okay, great, you want to go for a promotion? What's your story? What have you done about it? Who's going to, not just the sponsor of paper, who is a sponsor who is going to, as I say, die in a ditch for you, right? Go to bat for you. The sponsors I had make him partner literally knocked down doors to go into a room when he was not invited, a senior partner, and speak on my behalf, even because he came from a different business unit. And what I did is I booked a meeting with him and said, look, I've got a number of meetings with your clients, having really cool senior meetings. It's probably worthwhile giving you an update and also sharing maybe some insights that you can share with your clients. So that particular guy, I had known him for a long time. And he was great at being a very vocal advocate, and we had a really good personal relationship as well. I'd worked for him for a long time, so he kind of knew me, and he was a very kind of real raw character. Then I think about another person who was on that promotion panel, and the other thing is knowing who your audience is. And for partner level, in most organizations, it's a completely different maybe panel than you might see every day, right? Because actually the firm wants to take a decision collectively that these are the right group of people to go into the partnership. So you may not come across those people every day. They're very senior. And there was this one chap on the list that I didn't really know. And I knew that I needed most people around the table to actually talk, to know me, to have had good experiences of me, or to maybe know of me. They didn't need to know me intricately, but I knew that I wanted to kind of look at the list of people on that promotion panel, and it was a lot of people, or committee, let's say, and hopefully ensure that there were positive experiences, not because I bought them a coffee, but because I was doing valuable work and because they could see firsthand the impact I was having with their clients. So to give you an example, this particular guy, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I don't want to sell myself. I don't want to put myself forward." Neither do I. Even though it looks like I love talking about myself, maybe I don't gravitate towards selling myself. But it becomes far easier when I'm not selling myself. I sell without selling, and I've perfected how to, I think, do that, right? Because, for example, my goal-orientated Ollie was, okay, I would like him to know my name. I would like him to have had a good experience with me. He was running a particular portfolio, like a particular account, and he had a number of clients, and everybody who worked on that particular client site reported to him. I was meeting with a number of clients in his at the bank where he kind of he worked, and I knew that I was meeting with a lot of senior people. So I knew that I was doing really well with those clients. I was delivering work, but my goal was to share all of that information with him, showcase to him who I've been talking to, but also give him something. I wanted to give him something, give him a treat, right? Like I say to my kids, I'll give you a treat if you're good. So for me, I wanted to give him sound bites of useful, interesting things he could share with his clients himself. So when I booked the meeting, right, I asked for a meeting, not about me. It wasn't about, hey, I want to have a coffee. I would love to tell you about my story. No, that's selling. That's selling by selling. Selling without selling is when you make it about the other person and you have a genuine also interest and need to, to think about the other person. And for me, I did, because I was literally, part of my case was building an entire portfolio of work in this net new kind of area. And I was having a lot of success with different accounts. So for me, it made a lot of sense to actually know this guy that I didn't know, because he was an important decision maker. So that was the goal. 30-minute meeting. I don't need to say, hey, I'm up for promotion. Hey, I don't need to say that. I knew it would feed into the conversation at the right time. And what happened? 25 minutes, we're talking about him. We're talking about this particular topic. We're talking about clients. We're talking about what other banks similar to that, his bank, the bank that he looks after, are doing, and things that he could, his clients could be doing differently. I was giving him nuggets upon nuggets upon nuggets of information. And then, of course, because it's a human conversation, someone will naturally say, well, how are you? How are things for you? Blah, blah, blah. And you say, yeah, everything's good. I'm really busy. I'm also up for promotion, slip that out. And then, the last 5 minutes, I've already credentialized myself in 25 minutes. Now I'm leaving him with nuggets for upcoming meetings, and also the sense that I'm up for promotion. You don't need to do anything more. And actually what had happened was, it was then a natural conversation on, okay, well, that makes sense to me. I can see why. Let me know if there's anything I can do. And you don't need to do anything more than that, because everything you've just done speaks for itself. Now I have a starting position of a relationship to go back to him on and say, I've had more meetings with your clients. And for me, it was that kind of thing. So yes, you have to self-promote yourself. Yes, you have to advocate for yourself. I give you another quick example of when I was also, it was a 2-year track for me from getting to partner, so the level below partner, and then get into partner. So I went up the first time, didn't make it. And I was very early. I was like 9 years, since graduation. And I was told, I should be lucky to be through, all of this stuff. And we can talk about why I didn't make it that first year. I made it the second year. But I remember the year before the first 2 years being told by one of my colleagues, a partner, oh, Ollie, you know, and I was working flat out. I was doing great stuff. And I got really good feedback about getting to the next level. And part of the development feedback was the partners in our team don't all know what you do. What? Excuse me? Like, what? How dare you? Like, you know, I was insulted. But I obviously read that completely wrong. And ultimately, I wasn't selling myself. I wasn't promoting the work that I was doing to them because they weren't really my audience of where my book of value was coming from. My book of value was coming from different parts of the business, different locations. They were not. It wasn't there, but it was still very important for me to, and for anyone, to advocate to that immediate team, because guess what? They may not be the book of, you know, they may not be directly linked to where you're bringing in value, but actually they become the decision makers. So knowing kind of, you know, knowing how, again, the firm operates is an important thing.
I think the way that you deal with year one, you didn't make it. And then year two, you didn't kind of like just give up and say, you know what, it's either I have it or, you know, I'm going to get out or I'm going to start looking for another job. I think that's what some people would tend to do. If I don't get the promotion or what I want, I'm going to start figuring a way just to get out first,
Yeah.
as a first option. But I think you stick around and year two did happen for you. For that year, did you notice anything different in terms of your mindset? Was it more like you were even more goal oriented to make it happen? Or did you actually dial back a little bit to adapt to the possibility of you don't know what's exactly going to happen yet?
Yeah, sure. Is the evidence, is the proof. And again, like I learned early on that value matters. You know, when I joined Accenture, there was this almost a policy, like an actual policy, where you couldn't get promoted unless you had done tenure, right? A length of time at each level. So, okay. But then literally 2 years into joining, that thing disappeared, or 18 months into joining. And what I started to see was, I mean, I was overtaking people who, you know, had joined before me, and it just kept on happening. I was getting promoted. And for me, it all came down to exactly that. I was always driven by not just the goal, but the value that I'm going to add. And I wasn't able to articulate it back then as I'm creating value. It was more simple in terms of make that person happy, you know, do a good job. And, you know, I've learned the rules of the game, play the game. Playing the game meant delivering value. That was, if I translate it now, that's what it meant. And how did I do that? Content. I did that with content. The more content I developed, like for example, a lot of people work at junior levels, a lot of people work on projects, right? You have a project, you work on the project. Me, I worked on a project, and then every time I had a project, I would always summarize and kind of create my little, you know, memory, the little credential, the lessons learned. So not just a credential of what we did, this is how we did it, you know, the one page, but actually lessons learned, because those lessons learned turned into insights for my current client, my current boss, whoever. And also maybe if I'm working at, let's make it real, if I'm working at UBS, like if I'm doing some work at UBS and I summarize and I showcase some lessons learned, and then I'm having a conversation with a different bank, I can kind of showcase some of those lessons learned for that different bank, or for my colleague who's working with a different bank. So I learned that there was value in insightful information. And I just started every single time I worked on a project. I never had a mentality of I work on one project, that's my only focus. It was I work on one project, how much insights can I gather and share? And for me, the more I did that, the more I had insightful information, the more I started then being able to construct sentences and construct sentences impromptu, and just use the art of words to make something sound interesting. And that's a lot of the game, right? It's the content and it's how you deliver it. And then it came down to, okay, got lots of cool content. I need to deliver messages in a way that land, in a way that make me seen as a, you know, a peer-to-peer to a senior person. I remember leading a huge piece of work for the firm, and I was told by partners at the time, I wasn't yet a partner, we're going to go and see these clients. They read the news every day on this particular topic. It was Brexit. They read the news, they read the paper every single day. Your job is to tell them something they've not read this morning. Okay. That means that I have to have some insightful, anecdotal information of something that happened on a project, and it showcases my prowess in that area because I've seen it, I've lived it, I've dreamed it, I've breathed it, and it comes down to how you tell the story, interesting ways, analogies, showcase that you are the creator of that insightful information. And I always then would say to myself, because if I'm not sharing insightful information, I'm not consulting, I'm just doing. It's like going to the doctors and actually request, the doctor is there to consult, right? They call them consultants also. They're there to consult, they're there to give you advice based on experience, right? Based on skills. That's what you do. If you come to me, if I'm with a client, I have to give that client some advice. So when you start to elevate yourself to a level of not just I've been at the role for a number of years and I have, delivered, a good project. I've had no hygiene issues on the project. That's operational hygiene, right? But that's like a given, right? What you want to be elevating towards is the value, because if I'm sharing insightful information, you're going to trust me more to share insightful information. You're going to come to me to share insightful information. You're going to think of me when you have a problem because you're going to think I can help. And I was in this position where I was delivering real, 2 proper projects across different clients, which was another thing. Build a portfolio, not just have one thing that you're doing. And I was getting questions and queries from my colleagues, from clients, literally daily on this particular topic. I had a team of 30 people who were basically working, without any, we were just all building insightful information. I worked with them subscriptions to The Economist, to the FT, so that we had the budget for them to just read, download, turn information into something interesting. I don't want to hear anything that the FT has said. I want to see what they've said, and then I want to think about what we just did on a project with, this person over here, this person over there, or this bank over there, and form our own conclusions, make it insightful. Then you get brownie points for saying it in an even more interesting way, because then what happens is when you have all of that insightful information, you can share it in interesting ways, then you're performing. I used to look at the going to meetings as a performance, not in a arrogant way at all, not in a, oh, here, I'm here to perform. No, but in a I have to add value. If I go to the theatre, I expect to be entertained. If I go to a client meeting, entertain with insight. I'm not talking about standing on the table and doing a dance. I'm a dancer, so I'm definitely not talking about that. I am talking about entertaining, engaging. Why is it that I should not be entertained if I'm going to a meeting, with a client? So I looked at things differently. My meetings, when I would go to a meeting, it was, I have to entertain that person. I have to engage. I have to, I had this guy who had ADHD once, and I was like, bring it on, because that's going to keep me on my toes, right? I have to, can't miss a beat. You got to you've got to say the right things concisely in interesting ways, tease a little bit with information, let them want more, let them, draw in for more. So there was all of that, but it starts with, I found that I couldn't get to that performance if I didn't have all of the armor of information and insight. So I basically would just collect. I would have a standing email that would just be open. It would never be sent. It was in my drafts folder. And every time something interesting happened on a project or anything interesting I heard, I'd write it down. And then maybe every couple of weeks I'd kind of look at all the bullet points and kind of make logic and put them into groups. And then once you start seeing groups, you see patterns. Those patterns become conclusions. Then you can say confidently, and then you can say confidently some interesting things, interesting insights to senior people. Then it's really a mindset shift in terms of just think about them as being people, and you've got something interesting to say. I had to practice. I practiced a lot, and then I got into this groove of being able to very, much articulate myself and not really need I don't need the script. I don't need a script. I just need a couple of, pointers of information. And it's very important for me to be able to flow in any way. So, even you sent me the questions, I didn't look because I like to flow. So for me, it became something that I got very used to doing in terms of just being able to have a peer-to-peer conversation. To the second question around what was different in that second year. So I remember my husband, well, my fiance, was he fiance then? 2018. boyfriend, soon to be fiance. Yes, boyfriend, soon to be fiance, had said, yeah, you need to work harder. What? Like when I didn't make it, excuse me. And actually what he meant was, I obviously worked very, very hard, but don't be complacent. And I think I did get to a point where I was the underdog. That first year, I was 9 years with a firm, and everyone, you go through the process in January, so it starts in January. By January, I wasn't even a name. I was like in the hat, but like I wasn't a real contender. By July, apparently I was the front runner, right? July, yeah, the summer I was a front runner. And then by October, insightful, I've got inside information. And then by October, November, when it was announced, I didn't make it. I was number 4. I'd moved from number 1 to number 4, and the first 3 made it. That was a tough pill to swallow. All of the top 3 had many more years on me in terms of their tenure at the firm, but it still was a tough pill to swallow because I knew I was so close. And what happened was my interview. So you go through the panel interview. That first year was fine. The one-on-one interview that I had, I didn't land it. And I didn't land it, and I ended up working quite closely with the lady who interviewed me afterwards, and we got to know each other like very well. And like what I realized was I wasn't selling myself enough in that meeting, in that interview. The whole peer-to-peer thing, I wasn't selling myself enough. So when I was talking about all the amazing stuff I'd done, which was really impressive, right? Like we built a net new business for the firm. We were the central repository for, the single golden truth. If anyone wanted any information on Brexit, they came to us, and I was then running this Brexit practice across all of, all of financial services for the UKI. My holidays were interrupted by the head of financial services UKI calling me up whenever he had a meeting with the Bank of England or whoever to say, I've got a meeting. I was that person on call on WhatsApp. What do I say? What do I do? So we built something phenomenal, and we also built a phenomenal a phenomenal team of people who had no direct reporting line into me, but wanted to work on Brexit and wanted to be part of this net new thing that we had grown. We had so much creativity around what we did, and it was a fantastic story. But I didn't, I gave too much credit to another partner, quite frankly, who was ultimately the sponsor. And I kind of talked in the we language, and we, as opposed to actually I did this. And I remember the other partner I gave the credit to, lovely guy, and would always say how amazed he was with me. Because he would always say, he was very British. He would say, it's remarkable how, the work that you do, the work that you get done, this is obviously pre-Claude, right, pre-AI, but the work output that I would produce, it would take, in like 2 days, it would take a team of 5 people like 2 weeks. And I don't know, I was just, I was always very laser focused on, so I can come up with a really cool vision, a really cool idea, and think about how we get there, like actually how to make it happen, and so the whole concept of, we could have just had a Brexit business, but I wanted to be a bit more creative, and we expanded our Brexit business. We did some really cool, interesting events with clients, roundtables. We got some really cool marketing. We did a lot of creative things. We got budget for, and we built a tool. So we were quite entrepreneurial. We built like an actual product that we then sold to clients, right? A workflow tool. And we did that repeatedly, and that's where one of the reasons I won some work from EY. So we had a, you know, we had a really cool way of doing things, and I think I didn't give myself enough credit, you know, on that. And I was certainly a lead person speaking in any meeting beyond any partner. I would rock up to like senior meetings with clients, and it was like I was rolled out to be like, okay, go and speak. You know, no one else was speaking. So I didn't give myself enough credit. That was what it was. So then by the time the second year came, I knew that I had to maintain the same and just keep going and do more, and almost act like there's not operate in the exact same way, right? But just be consistent. Like there was not really the only mindset change was at the beginning. There was a thought of, gosh, what if I don't make it? But then I was like, not going to think like that. I'm going to make it. Like there is no option, but I'm not going to like go up again, because then I was like, is that this is it. This is it. So for me, it came down to doing more of the same and almost feeling like I'm already there. And that's what, you know, that's what happens. And you see how the language changes around you as well, you know, with regards to the people that you work with. But yeah, that was really the main thing.
Interestingly, you also mentioned whilst you were setting up the practice, you were doing creative things. At this stage of your career, whilst you were going for that partner promotion, have you noticed anything about yourself where you might start your own business one day at this stage yet?
I always had the drive, the entrepreneurial drive, the entrepreneurial spirit, because I literally basically just brought that to my teams. So I don't hear no very well. No, you can't do it. Really? What? Huh? Are you sure? Are you sure? Is there another way? You know, I have a problem with the word no. You know, no buts, no and is okay. No, and maybe we'll look at it later. That's okay. But I always had that kind of mind of, you know, exploring the unexplorable, right? Look at the, you know, the impossible is possible. It just takes longer. I always had that kind of mindset, and I think that came from my dad's framing, you know, which is very common in, I think, African and Asian households, right? You know, always, you know, take it further, think about doing things in a different way. You know, don't wait to be told. Don't wait for your teachers to, you know, to give you the homework to start learning, etc. So I always kind of had that kind of that mindset, that creative mindset, that let's push some boundaries mindset, let's take some risk mindset. So the ingredients for me were already there. I was too comfortable. I was very comfortable in corporate, you know, very comfortable. So never really thought about really pushing it to that next level. But of course I did only 3 years later. But I think at the time I was very much, you know, very much fine. But for sure, I was told by other people as well, you'd be phenomenal, like, you know, doing your own thing. And I think that's why at Accenture, I ended up then basically running our fintech incubator, where we would, for financial services in the UK, where we would bring people, you know, like basically like listen to pitches, decide who we're going to invest in, work with them until they get their product to a better stage, and then kind of help them get integrated into client communities where we can kind of co-create as well. And I kind of took that same learning and applied it to my team. So kind of got people to, you know, we had like competitions of people who would just come up with ideas, and they had it, and it was really cool. It was like Shark Tank, like, but without the actual investment that you give away, but kind of bringing that entrepreneurial spirit to my teams. And then I've also done a lot of net new business scaling in those companies where I build capability. So all the things that you know, obviously don't have to deal with all the negative issues with running a business, but I did a lot around scaling I'd say capabilities, like to support businesses. So basically putting together what our vision is, what the product or services that you're actually taking to market. And I think I was always an advocate for having not just services, as in I've got two people who can help you, but actually having products, frameworks, methodologies, workflow tools, like something tangible. And then, have an opinion, having the marketing plan. I kind of looked at everything. So I always kind of had that in that, I'd say, the intrapreneur aspects working in the corporations. And then, then I made the trigger a few years later.
I was about to use that word, that you also embody those entrepreneurs, in the company, and happy with doing all these new projects, starting new things, scaling, business and leads. And that's not actually a bad option. It's something possible to kind of explore the in between while still in the corporate setting, trying to figure that out. Early sign of maybe entrepreneurship, but without having the risk, the stress, and leaving the comfort zone per se.
Exactly.
And then that next stage, right? You mentioned where if you can't beat them, you join them. What was it like to leave Accenture after spending 13 years in the same firm, climbing through the ranks to another organization at that senior level?
It was hard, very hard. I was the Accenture lifer on the, on the table. So no one saw it coming. I was very pro Accenture. I really understood how the firm worked. I knew a lot of people, and I had that kind of that attitude to, I think, to succeed there. So no one saw it coming, and I was, a big people leader, and that was really hard for me, leaving people behind, as it were. So that was a really, really tough decision. But I had another point where I was, I had actually resigned from Accenture a few years before, and then was convinced to stay. So stayed. So I but this time, and that time round, it was a bit wobbly for me in terms of there was probably another reason for wanting to go, but I stayed, and when I stayed, I was happy about staying. This time round, I knew that there was no other. I knew I was going to leave. I knew that the next phase was literally a next phase that was really too good of an opportunity to turn down, and I knew it was time to go. And I also had some comfort knowing that I was going on a high, even though it was sad. So I try to look at both sides just to get me through it. And it was tough because I wanted to be respectful. So I had a number of discussions with my Accenture colleagues, but I was always clear that this is my decision. I do not see me changing my decision, but we had the conversations, and I stayed firm in what I decided, because I think when you know, and you're not sure, you get that, not really sure, you can be swayed. But I think when you know, and I knew. So it was hard, but it got easier, and that's how the cookie crumbled.
And then whilst you were at EY, at which point did that thought of maybe one day starting your thing come along?
Actually, I had started Fully Bossed when I was at Accenture. So I was on maternity leave. I basically, because the story is, I made partner fairly quickly. I then had a lot of people coming to me, and even before making partner, I had a lot of people coming to me. But certainly when I made it, I had a lot of people coming to me saying, how did you do it? Black, female, young black female in financial services, white dominated. Like, can you give us whatever you're taking? And it was like everyone was asking how, right? And then I got a lot of media coverage. I was like 35 women under 35 in the UK, all of this stuff. And I was doing I had cameras, I had Accenture. There was like this thing, I was in the magazine for Accenture, and these journalists would follow, like came to my house at like 6 a.m. They wanted to see like my day. And I was like, okay, it seems a bit boring to me, but they followed me around. It was so funny. And I realized that people really were interested in my life and, how I did it. And I realized that I then started to think about and look at the, the actual, the sadness, right? In that a lot of people just didn't know how. I had figured out how, but I hadn't really sat down and said to myself, how did I get it? I knew what I had to do. I knew I had to build relationships, sell without selling. I knew I had to do all these things, but I didn't know how to articulate it because I never had the time to stop and go, what am I doing? I just knew I had to still be really good at deals like M&A, transformation, and of course all the other things that go around it. But when people kept on asking me how, I wanted to make it tangible to them so that they could go and do something tomorrow with it. And I started to realize that the how came down to the softer skills, you know, the more human skills, the influence, the followership, the communication, the what's your personal brand? Remember the team who didn't know what I was doing because I wasn't articulating it, right? I wasn't articulating my personal brand enough. All of these things were important. And I just realized that everyone was asking me to do, you know, interviews and everything else. And I got the question all the time, how? How? That was the main question. So it started off, my idea for my business was not a business, it was a blog. I just wanted to blog because I didn't have time for business. I didn't care for a business. I didn't need a business. I just wanted to blog. And this is the thing with all good businesses, they start by adding value. So my value add was I wanted to share my insights. I had insightful information. People seemed to want to hear about it. I wanted to start a blog. But then I started writing, you know, this like concept, this blog, and I was like, well, there's a bit more here. Maybe there's a bit of coaching I could be doing, right, to people, which was our conversation a number of years ago. And that's kind of how it started. So you know, this business that I have now today really started. The initial concept was a coaching business, ultimately, and I felt that passionate about it, Katie, that I incorporated the company 2 days before I gave birth to a day before I gave birth to my firstborn. Don't know if you know that. So I did.
Nope.
And so I was at Accenture. I was my firstborn, I was pregnant whilst I was at Accenture. I was on maternity leave, had the baby, incorporated the company. Whilst I'm on maternity leave, EY had already approached me like just before I had the baby and said, hey, would you like to join us? And I'm like, no, didn't. This another consultancy, it's all good. And by the way, I'm about to have a baby and I'm about to move to Singapore. And they were like, it's all good, no problem at all. So we continued talking, and you know, the offer was great, and you know, the prospects were great, and you know, I negotiated and I, you know, got what I really kind of needed. But yeah, it was very much I had this company in that period where I literally was on maternity leave and was then formulating, you know, the kind of the ideas for the company. But it started off as a blogging concept, and then it moved on to blogging and coaching, essentially.
We might need a second episode on, you know, the family, the life stuff. But very interestingly, I think as you can see in this example, there could be so many opportunities that come at you at once. And you almost have to make that decision like, what are you looking for and what would serve you? What would be something that aligns with you at that stage? And so coincidentally, you were, you know, starting the family, you were incorporating the company, you were taking up a new offer in a new country all at the same time, right? And it seems to most people that would be like chaotic, right? That would be like messy. That would be frightening. What was like your go-to way of handling so much happening at the same time in
Yeah.
life, you know, at work, in your
Mm,
personal kind of growth? What will be
mm.
your tips to navigate all of the things happening all at once on you?
Look, I really think this is an important question because I am human. And a lot of the time, I think it comes across as I'm superwoman and I can do so many things and nothing bothers, and you know, it doesn't bother me, it doesn't faze me. I'm very, very much human. Yeah, definitely human. So it's important to say that we all need to protect that mental space, right? I've had those moments for sure. But I think actually my training as a consultant has helped me. My training, one, as a consultant, whereby you never know if a project is going to pull off, if you know, you're employed, you have your role, like sell more stuff, right, with clients. You still then need to go and showcase your value every single time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's delayed, right? So but my entire thing was uncertainty is something that's going to be consistent. I dealt with uncertainty. And then my training as a consultant in mergers and acquisitions, some deals pull off, some deals don't. Some deals you think are going to get to the very end, big organizations, and then they can't agree, and then you spent a lot of time on it, and then it doesn't close. So I kind of learned how to deal with uncertainty from a early point in my career, and I think that set me up well for managing with uncertainty to this day. And there's a lot more I can tell you. I mean, every year probably since 2020, I've dealt with major uncertainty. Where am I going to live? We've had 3 girls. The last pregnancy we had was tough, right? Like the first 2, all of them were relatively all easy pregnancies, right? I had them very close together and everything else, but there were just more challenges going through the pregnancy with my last born. Totally fine now, but the uncertainty to deal with throughout, plus all the other things that we went through at that point in time, like literally every single year I've dealt with major uncertainty. Having a partner like my husband who also sees life like me, like glass half full kind of attitude, has definitely helped, because you kind of learn to deal with the things that literally are in your control. And as a good consultant, you learn to plan and, have contingency. So I remember, at different points in the last few years, literally planning for my life in one country, schools, location, work, clients, friends, everything, versus my life in another country, versus my life in, because I didn't know where we're going to live. And, we've been this is our 5th country now, and it's kids don't care like where you're moving. They still want to be fed, they still need to go to school, all of this stuff. So you kind of learn to deal with, there are going to be things that you have to deal with in parallel, right? Which just you have to like accept your losses, that sometimes you're going to have a little bit of loss in terms of investing in doing maybe 2 sets of applications for 2 different schools, whatever, and paying deposits, whatever. It's the cost of uncertainty. But the mental protection is far greater, right? I can deal with all of that. And in terms of, okay, get comfortable with the options that are present. Maybe I don't know which option it will be, but I know what option 1 looks like, and I know what option 2 looks like, and get comfortable with kind of each of the things in those two brackets. And I think then for having multiple life moments happen at the same time. Look, I mean, I'm a very hands-on mother, hands-on parent, but also having the support in certain countries has definitely helped. It definitely makes a difference, like for sure. And I think being able to almost prioritize making sure that we have some form of help enables me and my husband to do more. But if I think about that time of going to EY, new company, new country, new region, new job, new baby just on maternity leave, there is an aspect of not resilience, but there's an aspect of go get it. You need to have that kind of go get it attitude, and no self-doubt. That's fine, but don't exude the self-doubt. You've got to almost like allow yourself to have self-doubt and then get over it. Like I always give myself like if I'm going through something, if something really bothers me, I try and always say to myself, I give myself 48 hours. I want to feel the feelings, rage, anger, annoyance, frightened, scared, whatever it is. But then I start to do something about it. I'm a do something about it type of person. So feel what I feel, then do something about it. For me, doing something about it is processing my thoughts. It's really important to process your thoughts. And I've been very good with processing my thoughts, whether it's writing things down. Sometimes I've processed thoughts to a point I write a song or I write a poem, but I process my thoughts and I think about the next steps. I think in pragmatic steps, and that's helped. And I think also, I say pragmatic, but my husband will laugh at me because he's the most pragmatic there is. So actually having somebody else that you can bounce an idea off, or bounce the uncertainty off, or bounce that, gosh, I'm going through so many things, is really helpful. Being able to talk about the many things that you're going through is really helpful. And I think in that moment, of course, I had, new country, and also I'm going into another ethnic country, but I'm a new type of ethnic minority in this country, and also I'm a senior female, right? That's a whole different whammy, because there's gender, there's so many different things. So, but if I don't walk in and believe in myself, then the only thing that they're going to see is, oh, have you seen the new Black female partner? That's it. So if I don't walk in and just be me and just believe in myself, so that belief, that mindset piece was essential. And for many people who, I've had friends, of Black origin, of Asian origin, of Caucasian origin, who have really struggled in certain countries where they're the only person who look like them, and to the point where they don't put themselves out there for work, for opportunities, for whatnot. And I think for me, I've just always taken, and maybe it's a seniority, I was already a partner, so maybe that helps, but I've always been me. So I would like to think that I would also be like this at a junior level. But I think when people would ask me, oh, have you got any trepidations about going to Asia or going to Singapore? I knew what they were thinking. I would address it head on. I addressed the question head on with EY leadership. Have you got any Black partners? What do you do? How many female partners do you have? Like, I was head on, in a nice way. But it was a thing for me that wasn't going to be, brushed under the carpet. And I embraced it, so I took on roles that were very much around DEI, alongside my main job. But I embraced it. I sat in meetings with senior clients, male clients, who I was the main person speaking, the main kind of content person. And I had to really demand their attention in a nice way. And I did, through my words, right? But you've got to kind of walk in knowing that you're the underdog. I'm okay with that. I'm okay being the underdog. I'm okay with that, because I love to entertain. The entertaining bit for me is where you think I'm the underdog, I entertain you, and you're like, oh my God, wow, that was awesome. And for me, that's the turnaround. So did I use a little bit of competition, like competition with myself? Can I convert this person's mindset? Yes, that was also part of it, right? Convert what it is that they think, that they know, the preconception that they have about whether it's a group of people, a gender, whatever. Convert that opinion. That was always kind of like a ingrained internal mechanism I have for dealing with moments of, I'm the only person in the room. I'm happy to be the only person in the room. Like, bring it on. Let's redefine what the only person in the room means. And I'm going to redefine it so much that you're going to want to be the only person in the room as well after I'm done. So for me, I always try to turn it into a positive. I also saw an opportunity. And one thing that my husband and I are really good at is coming up with strategy and talking about, like different ways of doing things in cool ways. And for me, I kind of also thought that there would be an opportunity to help people in Asia, where there's potentially not as much of a voice, and it's, a lot more focused on maybe just conforming, and not to shake things up, but really be that representation of difference, right? And success. You can be different and also succeed. And I think coming in as a young female partner, comparatively, a female partner of ethnic origin, a Black female partner, all signals interesting things and useful things and positive things to many different groups. So for me, that was also something that I knew I wasn't just doing this for me, I was doing it for other people. And I also saw people like me who struggled, in Asia. And I saw myself as, a bit of a role modeling also for them. It can get better, So for me, there were many things that you go through internally, but then I had a greater pull factor. One day this could be my girls, you've got to, and really just being that role model for other people was something quite powerful for me.